Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the smoky, soot-streaked haze of Georgian London, where the scent of coal hangs heavy and chamber pots fly out windows with casual indifference. But in the midst of this gray, grimy world, something downright tropical starts to take root. Imagine it. You're trudging through rain-slick cobbles, dodging piles of who knows what, and suddenly, displayed in a glass shop window like a jeweled crown, is a pineapple. It glows golden under candlelight. It looks utterly alien, like a fruit from another planet, or at least another climate zone. The leaves are spiked and proud, the body ridged and regal, and it smells like sunshine and rum-soaked dreams. You can't afford it. Nobody you know can afford it. And if you so much as breathe too hard near it, you might owe the shopkeeper your entire yearly wage. This is the start of an obsession, one of the weirdest status frenzies in British history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink slowly as carriages rattle past and chimney smoke curls into the damp night air. It's the 1700s, and Britain is exploding with empire, ambition, and, oddly enough, pineapples. Not thousands, not even hundreds, just a few, a precious few. So rare they're locked behind glass. So revered that poets write odes to them. So bizarre that someone might literally bow to one. You enter a townhouse in Mayfair, invited not because you're charming or clever, but because tonight, the host is unveiling his very own pineapple. And no, you don't get to eat it. You get to look at it. Maybe sniff it if you're lucky. The fruit sits proudly on a porcelain pedestal, bathed in candlelight like a saint in a cathedral. Guests cluster around it in powdered wigs, murmuring reverently. A woman actually tears up. You don't know whether she's overcome with awe or just drunk. Back in the Caribbean, pineapples are street fruit, affordable, delicious, and growing by the ton. But here in London, they're less food and more religious relic. Historians still argue whether the obsession was pure status theater or something deeper. A longing for empire's warmth, a metaphor for control over the tropical unknown. What we do know is this. In the early 1700s, Britain's colonies in the West Indies were producing pineapples at scale. But scale is relative when you're shipping fragile, rot-prone fruit across an unforgiving ocean. Many never made it. The ones that did, they were celebrities. Literally paraded through streets, crowned with ribbons, presented to dukes and duchesses like newborns. One fruit reportedly sold for the equivalent of £5,000 today. Not a crate, not a bushel. One. You start to get the sense that Georgian England had its priorities absolutely in order. And by in order, we mean delightfully deranged. You linger in Covent Garden, where street hawkers shout rhymes and jugglers balance pineapples on their heads. Or rather fake ones. They can't afford the real deal either. Up in Hyde Park, a lady in ruffles sketches a pineapple in her diary and wonders aloud whether it is divine or demonic. Possibly both. Meanwhile, architects are busy adding pineapples to literal buildings. Spires are topped with them. Columns are carved with them. Even the Great Stowe House Garden gets its own stone pineapple like some sort of fruity lighthouse. And don't even get us started on the Dunmore pineapple in Scotland. That's a literal pineapple-shaped tower, built in the middle of nowhere, just to show that the Earl had taste, or at least money. Of course, underneath all this glamour is a world built on sugar, slavery, and steam. The same ships that bring pineapples are stuffed with enslaved people and gunpowder. No Georgian aristocrat plucking fruit from a hothouse in Kent ever saw the blistered hands that planted it. But we'll get to that. For now, you're just a sleepy observer, padding through parlors where pineapples are flanked by silver forks that will never touch them. There's a rumor going around that somewhere someone actually ate their pineapple. You hear this whispered like heresy. They sliced it, a lady says, fanning herself dramatically. They didn't even paint it first. The pineapple isn't just rare, it's symbolic. It means you're connected to empire. It means your greenhouse is hot enough, your staff disciplined enough, your fortune robust enough to grow what nature never intended. It's control in fruit form. And yet, it's so juicy, so fragrant, you imagine biting into it. Just once. All this theater, just for a taste. But no, pineapples aren't for eating. Not yet. They're for being seen. Fringe writers at the time had a field day. One pamphlet in 1729 described the pineapple as too noble for vulgar digestion. Another mocked a peer who kept his in a velvet-lined cage. Satirists painted them with cherubs. One poem compared them to the king's backside. Tasteful. Still, the dream of owning one lingered. Even the newly rich industrialists, trying desperately to break into high society, saw the pineapple as a shortcut to elegance. You could buy wigs, gowns, even servants. But the pineapple? That was divine favor. You pull your cloak tighter as you walk back out into the damp. Somewhere behind you, a servant gently places the pineapple into a glass cabinet, locking it with a tiny brass key. It will sit there for a week, maybe two. Then it will rot. Slowly, quietly, dignified decay. And the guests will return again and again to watch. No one talks about the smell. The strange part? This is just the beginning. You haven't even seen the hothouses yet, or the thefts, or the rentable pineapples. Yes, really. But tonight, you've stepped into a world where a piece of fruit could upend society, woo royalty, and outshine the chandelier. And all you had to do was not eat it. You wake up to salt in the air, the creak of wood beneath your feet, and the slow heave of waves slapping against the hull. You're aboard a merchant vessel, probably not by choice, sailing the triangular trade route between Britain, the Caribbean, and West Africa. The deck smells like rum, tar, and fear. Somewhere below, in the shaded hold, lie a handful of very fragile, very expensive passengers. Pineapples. They're tucked into crates lined with straw, bundled like infants, packed between sacks of sugar and barrels of molasses. The ship's master, a leathery man with teeth the color of driftwood, checks on them hourly, not because he loves fruit, but because if they rot, the voyage is a financial disaster. Pineapples don't travel well, not in 1709, not over 4,000 miles of unforgiving Atlantic. They bruise, they ferment, they sweat, they die. You peek into one crate. The fruit stares back at you like it's judging your shoes. There's already a soft spot forming. Too much humidity in the lower deck. The captain mutters something about wind gods and knocks on the mast for luck. He's not superstitious, he says, just careful. And deeply terrified of fruit-based bankruptcy. Smuggling is common, not for spices, not even for tea. But pineapples? Absolutely. If you can sneak one into London without the East India Company taking a slice, you've just made a year's wages. Historians still argue whether more pineapples arrived legally or illegally during the 18th century. The lines blurred often. Customs officers were easy to bribe. And who's to say whether that pineapple in your portmanteau was a personal gift from the governor of Jamaica or, say, nicked off a plantation dock? Somewhere near the Azores, a storm barrels down. Canvas sails flap like panicked geese. A crate breaks loose. You catch a glimpse of yellow through the rain, and then it's gone. One pineapple sacrificed to Poseidon. The captain screams like he's just lost a child. Technically, he has. That pineapple was insured. Back in London, word travels faster than ships. Gossip spreads that a shipment has landed. Gentlemen rush to the docks, eager to see who'll get the first pick. One enterprising importer hosts a private viewing. Admission charged, naturally. The crowd stares at 4 pineapples, each perched on a crimson pillow. One woman faints. Another offers her brooch in exchange for a sniff. Fruit auctions are brutal. Elbows fly. debts are made. One pineapple ends up in the lap of a duke's mistress. Another vanishes entirely. Rumors say it was eaten by the dockmaster in a moment of godless hunger. You notice how often pineapples disappear, not just from tables, but from manifests, from ledgers, from history. Fringe accounts tell of a pineapple that made it all the way to Edinburgh, only to be stolen from a locked carriage and later seen displayed in the window of a fishmonger who just found it. Theft wasn't rare, it was inevitable. When one item is worth a month's wages, temptation ripens fast. Rot is the enemy. Even if your pineapple survives the sea, it begins to die the moment it's picked. You step into a merchant's back room, humid, dark, lined with drying herbs and hopeful experiments. There's a pineapple with candles around it, like a vigil. The merchant whispers that he rotates it 3 times a day and sings to it in Dutch. You don't ask why. You just nod slowly. Historians still debate whether these pineapples were ever meant for consumption at all. Were they fruit? Were they luxury imports? Or were they something more abstract? A placeholder for empire, for power, for control over decay? Some say they were devotional objects. Others say they were just really, really overpriced snacks. Still, you can't ignore the ships. British trade during the Georgian era boomed. Molasses in one direction, rum in another, human lives in the darkest parts of the triangle. Pineapples were the sweet gloss on the whole operation, proof that something rare and golden could emerge from a brutal machine. One ship captain kept a pineapple nailed to his mast for good luck. Another tried to grow one below deck using a lantern, a mirror, and prayer. Didn't work, but 10 points for optimism. You get off the ship in Bristol, where the smell of sugar refineries burns your nose. Pineapple shipments arrive here too, though not as frequently as in London. A gentleman in a velvet waistcoat is waiting with a coach and 4 horses for one fruit. He's come all the way from Bath. His footman carries the pineapple like it's made of glass. In a nearby tavern, sailors trade tales of tropical ports and pineapple feasts that never happened. We saw one the size of a pig's head, a drunk swears. Fed 10 men. You've learned not to believe anything that starts with, "We saw one." Meanwhile, back in Jamaica, pineapples are rotting on roadsides. Overproduction, sunburn, ants. They're not rare there. They're a nuisance. Kids play cricket with the underripe ones. But no one in Britain wants to hear that. Here, the pineapple is sacred. At the port, you see something odd. A man wrapping a pineapple in velvet and slipping it under his coat. It's a forgery. A painted gourd with carefully glued fronds. He's a pineapple smuggler of a different kind, selling fakes to gullible collectors. This will become a booming side trade. By 1745, you could buy counterfeit pineapples on Fleet Street, for display purposes only. Cheaper, cleaner, and, most importantly, doesn't go squishy in a week. You head back toward the docks as another ship unloads. The crew is haggard. 3 pineapples survived. One is already turning brown. The importer shouts that it's still good for 3 days with luck. He says this while dabbing it with a cloth like a feverish child. In the distance, a nobleman's servant loads the fruit into a gilded cart. London's ready for another miracle. One more proof that Britain can have anything it wants. Even a sun-soaked tropical symbol shipped across the sea in a wooden box, guarded like treasure and revered like art. And somewhere along the way, you realize the pineapple has already won. You're standing in the echoey drawing room of a Georgian townhouse, shoes squelching slightly from London's ever-generous rain. But your host doesn't notice. All eyes are fixed on a pedestal at the center of the room. Draped in blue silk, trimmed in lace, and set under a bell jar of hand-blown glass, the guest of honor tonight isn't a person. It's a pineapple. No one's talking loudly. Voices are hushed, reverent, like you're in a chapel. And honestly, it feels like one. The pineapple sits in solitude, golden light glinting off its patterned skin, proud crown fanned out like a heraldic crest. It's not being served. It's not being sliced. It's being worshipped. You sidle up to a woman in lilac satin who's whispering to her husband. "It's a Queen Charlotte variety," she says, in the same tone one might use to describe a royal bloodline. 16 months to ripen. They say it's never even touched the soil. Your eyebrows do their best to remain polite. Never touched the soil? You wonder if it was levitated to maturity by servants trained in levitation. But you don't ask. Georgian England is a world where fruit can be more important than facts. Around you, the performance of class plays out with every lace cuff and powdered wig. Your host beams, hands behind his back, pretending not to eavesdrop on the admiration. The pineapple has done its job. It has elevated him. It says, "I am wealthy, connected, and effortlessly worldly. I control nature. I can conjure the Caribbean without leaving Mayfair." Historians still argue whether the Georgian pineapple craze was more about social dominance or sheer novelty. But standing here, surrounded by opera singers and parliamentarians sniffing a fruit like it's the Turin Shroud, you get the sense it might have been both. The pineapple's position at the center of these gatherings wasn't accidental. In fact, pineapple stands were a whole design category. Ornate silver pedestals with clawed feet and crystal cradles were crafted solely to display one fruit. Just one. These were not functional objects. They were pageantry incarnate. One stand had tiny cherubs carved around the base, holding up an inscription. "O rare fruit, how sweet thy crown." Somewhere, a furniture maker wept from pride. You move through the crowd, noting the number of guests pretending they've tasted pineapple. A man in a cravat insists it has a honeyed finish with an aftertaste of victory. You bite your tongue. He's never had one. Most of these people haven't, but they want to. And maybe, in this room, pretending is enough. Then there's the matter of what to do with the pineapple after its starring role. Once it begins to wilt, it's quietly moved to a secondary location. The back parlor, perhaps, where the lesser guests, bankers, writers, people with noses slightly too large for proper society, can be allowed to enjoy it. One slice each if they're lucky. Two, if the host is feeling wildly democratic. The texture? Fibrous. The flavor? Faintly fermented. But nobody complains. They say it's divine. You chew slowly and wonder if this is what opulence tastes like, kind of acidic and slightly overhyped. Meanwhile, on the fringes of all this ceremony, fringe thinkers are raising eyebrows. One satirist writes a short play called The Fruit of Folly, where aristocrats dance around a pineapple and sacrifice their dignity to it like druids. Another pamphlet mocks a viscount who paid to have his pineapple immortalized in oil paint, then never noticed the artist swapped it out for a melon halfway through. It's still hanging in a hall somewhere. But not everyone finds the pineapple ridiculous. In fact, many treat it like sacred geometry. Its spiral structure is discussed in salons as proof of divine design. Mathematicians point to its Fibonacci pattern. Ministers use it in sermons about the natural order of God's universe. The pineapple becomes, well, a kind of fruity cathedral. At one particularly grand dinner party, you're seated next to a colonel who claims his pineapple was blessed by a bishop. You nod politely. He's had a lot of brandy. The strangest part? The fruit's popularity isn't limited to the upper echelons. Down in the street-level taverns and tea houses, you hear children bragging that their uncle touched a pineapple once. One boy claims he saw one at 3 paces and smelled it for free. People pass stories around like ghost sightings. One woman swears she had a dream about eating one and woke up full. Sure, there's even a traveling showman in York who promises the exotic smell of empire for a penny. It turns out to be vinegar and sugar in a damp cloth, waved theatrically while he describes a pineapple in graphic detail. Nobody gets a refund. Everyone walks away slightly confused and very sticky, But not all displays are so theatrical. In quieter corners of the gentry, pineapples become seasonal guests. Brought out for garden parties, positioned beside busts of Caesar or Apollo, they're meant to signal sophistication. A visual shorthand for, yes, I read Virgil in the morning and control global fruit logistics by tea. There's a record of one lady in Bath who kept a pineapple on her piano for 2 months, writing letters to friends about its developing character. She compared it to her cat. There's no word on what happened when it started to mold. Of course, not every pineapple led such a charmed life. Sometimes they arrived bruised. Sometimes they arrived late. And sometimes, to the horror of the host, they arrived already eaten. One baronet sued a shipping company for delivering a pineapple with a suspicious bite mark. The case was dismissed. Could have been a rat, the judge said, while everyone in court tried not to laugh. You take one last look at the pineapple before the host dims the candles. It's still there, glowing softly in the amber light. Untouched, unspoiled. A perfect, inedible dream. Tomorrow it may be gone. But tonight, it rains. You're standing at the edge of a garden. But not just any garden. This one bristles with symmetry, polished gravel paths, and hedges clipped so tightly they look like they've been ironed. The air smells faintly of lavender and overconfidence. Somewhere behind you, a string quartet tunes up near a gazebo. The clink of teacups echoes from the terrace. But your eyes are fixed on a strange, steaming structure tucked behind a brick wall. It looks like a mini palace had a baby with a chimney. Welcome to the world of pineapple pits. Yes, Georgian England, not content to merely import pineapples, decided to grow them on British soil. Or rather, British manure. You step through a wrought iron gate into a hothouse that smells like compost, citrus, and ambition. The heat hits you like a tropical slap. Inside, long rectangular beds cradle the fruit in various stages of development. Some are tiny, spiky knobs. Others have reached full golden glory, guarded like crown jewels. The secret? Horse dung. Loads of it. The pineapple pit is basically an 18th century furnace, where decomposing manure is piled into flanking trenches. These hotbeds generate warmth, and the beds in between are where pineapples are planted. You can practically hear the vegetables screaming from envy. It took about 2 years to coax a single pineapple to ripen this way. It required constant monitoring, the right mix of humidity, warmth, and whispered encouragement. Gardeners had to be part botanist, part magician, part full-time pineapple nanny. One noblewoman reportedly dismissed 3 head gardeners in a single season because their pineapples lacked spirit. Historians still argue whether she was being poetic or just very, very cranky. You crouch beside a ripening fruit, its skin glowing with that telltale amber hue. A gardener in a linen apron gently brushes dust from its crown with something that looks suspiciously like a baby's hairbrush. "This one's for the Duchess," he says, pride swelling in his voice. She names them. You wisely don't ask what this one's called. Growing pineapples in Britain was less about yield and more about symbolism. You weren't feeding your family. You were declaring yourself master of the impossible. Taming the tropics. Duplicating empire in miniature. It was horticulture as power play. Even the design of these pits was a kind of status badge. Some estates had pineapple hothouses with stained glass windows. Others built mock ruins around them, so you could stroll dramatically past your fruit cultivation like a melancholy Roman. One particularly eccentric lord installed fountains nearby, not for irrigation, just so the pineapples would have something pleasant to listen to. That's one way to deal with the silence of aristocracy. Of course, this obsession came with its oddities. Garden manuals of the period gave detailed pineapple growing instructions, some helpful, others less so. One 1750s text insisted that singing Italian arias near the plants improved their vigor. Another warned never to let pineapples hear thunder. There's even a fringe account of a man who kept his pineapples in the same room as his harpsichord to expose them to refined vibrations. No word on whether the fruit developed taste and handle. You move toward a second pit, this one slightly larger and covered with oiled linen stretched over wooden frames. It's like a greenhouse crossed with a ship's sail. Inside, dozens of pineapples lean toward the slanted winter light. A girl sweeps the floor between beds. She tells you her family's been working this garden for 4 generations. My great-grandfather grew the earls first, she says. Took him 23 months. Had to shave his beard over it for warmth. Again, you decide not to ask follow-up questions. What's strange is how little of this fruit was eaten. Most pineapples grown in British soil weren't for consumption at all. They were displayed. You'd grow 1, maybe 2, a year if you were lucky, then place the most perfect specimen at your dinner party or ball. It would sit in the center of the table, never touched. It might be rented out for other events. Yes, pineapple rental was a legitimate side hustle. You pass a small stable near the pit and realize something. The horses inside aren't for riding. They're just here for the dung. These are pineapple horses. You give one a sympathetic pat. It snorts, unimpressed. The nobility might be chasing tropical grandeur, but for this horse, it's just another day of eating hay and donating heat. Still, there's something undeniably magical about these pits. They're living contradictions. Raw decay producing delicate sweetness, labor feeding luxury, nature filtered through layers of wealth and whimsy. You watch as another gardener enters with a copper watering can shaped like a swan. The pineapples receive their drink with what you swear is smug satisfaction. And then there's the legacy. Long after pineapples stopped being the status symbol du jour, the pits remained. Some were repurposed for orchids, others became eccentric garden follies. One was turned into a chapel, but for a glittering century, they represented the pinnacle of horticultural ambition. You weren't truly grand unless your estate smelled faintly of warm pineapple and horse sweat. Historians still debate the environmental wisdom of it all. Was it brilliant adaptation or wasteful vanity? Probably both. But standing in this hothouse, you can't help admiring the sheer dedication. These people didn't just dream of tropical fruit. They summoned it. With dung and glass and tireless optimism, they built little corners of the Caribbean in the heart of chilly Surrey. The sun dips behind the hills. Inside the pit, the light turns amber. A gardener adjusts a frond. A pineapple, 2 years in the making, leans ever so slightly toward the glow. And in that moment, you understand why they did it. Not for the taste, but for the triumph. You're at a party now. Not the stiff, powdered wig sort with string quartets and scandal hidden behind fans, but something far more wooden. Because this is a party where the guest of honor isn't present in the flesh. It's carved, painted, sometimes gilded, occasionally mounted on top of a fence post, like a fruity scarecrow with serious grandeur. Welcome to the age of pineapple decor, where obsession seeps beyond dining rooms and gardens to colonize art, architecture, and even your doorknob. You step up to the entrance of a country estate, and there it is. A pineapple the size of a toddler looming from the gateposts, stone-carved and solemn. The message is loud and clear. Welcome to my home. I have fruit-shaped money. Because if you couldn't own a real pineapple every week, you could still display its likeness and let visitors assume. It was the 18th century equivalent of posting vacation pics with filters strong enough to bend light. Now, inside this manor, you wander into a hallway where pineapple motifs adorn the wallpaper. The chairs have pineapple finials. The chandelier? Pineapples. Subtle as a brass marching band. It's all part of the Georgian aesthetic, a language of taste that whispered and sometimes shouted, wealth, refinement, and I read Voltaire but also love exotic snacks. And this isn't just a rich person eccentricity. Even middle-class households, eager to climb the social ladder, got in on the trend. Pineapple-themed tea sets became all the rage. Decorative plates bore fruity crests. You once saw a chamber pot with pineapples painted delicately around the rim. Let's not linger on that image. Some enterprising artisans leaned in hard. Pineapple-shaped sugar bowls, crystal fruit domes, and fireplace tools with pineapple handles started appearing in catalogs. There were even hairpins modeled after the spiny crown of the fruit. A hat pin shaped like a pineapple reportedly started a fight in a London theater when its wearer blocked the view of 2 entire rows. Class and combat, all in one accessory. And the architecture. Oh, the architecture. You can't talk pineapple decor without meeting the Pineapple Pavilion in Dunmore, Scotland. A true fever dream in stone. Picture this, a stately mini-temple topped with a giant stone pineapple as its dome. Not a motif, not a frieze. A pineapple, full, round, detailed down to each individual scale, capping the entire building like the crown of fruit royalty. Built in the 1760s by the Earl of Dunmore, it was originally a garden retreat. Historians still argue whether it was meant to celebrate the return of the Earl from his stint as governor in Virginia, or if he simply loved fruit that much. Either way, the structure remains one of the most bizarrely elegant architectural oddities in Britain. And yes, it still stands. Tourists visit it. People get married under it. You half expect a pineapple priest to officiate. Why the obsession with pineapple images, you ask? Well, think of it as a kind of brand. The fruit symbolized hospitality, but also exoticism, control over the unknown, and a flirtation with tropical danger, all wrapped up in golden symmetry. In an empire stretching across continents, slapping a pineapple on your door knocker was like saying, "Yes, I am worldly. I probably have a cousin in Barbados. Please remove your boots." Even churches weren't immune. One chapel in Norfolk carved pineapple columns into its pulpit. A rector in Devon described his pineapple-shaped baptismal font as a symbol of rebirth, exotic faith, and occasional indigestion. Fringe thinking? Maybe. But you can't deny it's memorable. One fringe group even believed pineapples possessed spiritual vibrations. A secretive dinner society in York held annual fruit ceremonies where members wore pineapple masks and gave speeches about tropical virtue. One speech apparently compared pineapples to the Holy Trinity: 3 layers, 1 fruit. They disbanded after someone tried to actually eat the ceremonial centerpiece. Of course, satire followed close behind. Punch magazine once featured a cartoon where a humble turnip is dressed in pineapple attire, trying to sneak into a dinner party. The caption reads, "Imposter." He knows nothing of colonial hardship. Even the fruit's fame couldn't protect it from parody. But the motif endured. Even today, walk into any vintage shop or retro home goods store and you'll probably find a pineapple-shaped lamp or cocktail shaker. The Georgian obsession has echoes in every kitschy bar and beach-themed Airbnb. What began as a symbol of luxury became a sort of nostalgic shorthand for breezy hospitality, and maybe a dash of irony. Still, back in the Georgian era, pineapples and decor weren't just about fashion. They were visual social climbing, especially for those who couldn't afford the real thing. You might not have access to an actual fruit, but you could commission a pineapple weather vane. And when your neighbors came over? Oh yes, we adore pineapples. Simply must get one fresh someday. You pass by a nursery where a child's crib has been carved with tiny pineapples along the edge. The baby coos and waves a rattle that's suspiciously spiny. The entire next generation, raised on fruity grandeur. And the artists, never ones to miss a trend, began sneaking pineapples into oil portraits. In one, a noblewoman reclines in satin, cradling a pineapple like it's a golden baby. In another, a young man stares into the distance, hand resting on a marble pedestal, atop which sits, inexplicably, a pineapple. Historians still debate whether these inclusions were genuine admiration or a kind of elite performance art. Either way, The message was clear. This fruit? It's part of me now. You sit on a settee beneath a carved wooden pineapple finial and wonder, not for the first time, whether anyone ever got tired of it all. Whether someone, somewhere, threw down their fork at a pineapple-themed banquet and shouted, "Enough! Bring me a potato with gravitas." But then the harpsichord strikes up. Another pineapple-shaped cake is wheeled out. Guests coo. A small child curtsies to a stone pineapple in the foyer. And just like that, the moment passes. The fruit may not be in season, but the symbolism never spoils. You're in a kitchen now, though kitchen hardly does justice to the scale of this operation. Copper pans gleam from every hook. There's a roaring hearth, giant wooden tables, and at least 3 cooks moving with the precision of military surgeons. A footman rushes by with a folded cloth covering something. He moves as though he's guarding treasure, and in a way, he is. You follow him quietly and catch a glimpse beneath the cloth. It's a pineapple. Perfect, golden, ridiculously smug-looking. This is the moment of the reveal, and you've landed smack in the middle of a Georgian dinner party. But not just any party. This one has been carefully orchestrated around one fruit. The pineapple isn't dessert. It's not even a side dish. It's the headliner, the centerpiece, the Beyoncé of the buffet. Everything about tonight's dinner has been leading up to the pineapple presentation. And it doesn't disappoint. The pineapple, arranged on a silver stand engraved with vines and cherubs, is slowly unveiled in the dining room. There's a collective gasp from the guests. One older gentleman coughs into his cravat, clearly overcome with awe or perhaps pineapple envy. The host beams, as if he personally climbed a tree in Antigua to retrieve it. And here's the twist. No one eats it, not tonight. Possibly not ever. In many cases, the pineapple was purely decorative. It sat in the middle of the table like a golden, spiky celebrity, admired, discussed, even toasted, but never touched. Some hosts would use the same pineapple over and over for multiple dinners until it rotted into compostable shame. Others would rent one from a fruit supplier only to return it the next morning, slightly bruised but still Instagram-ready, if Instagram had existed in the 1780s. Historians still argue whether this practice was meant to impress or to intimidate. Was the pineapple a symbol of generous hospitality or social one-upmanship? Did it whisper, "Welcome, friend," or scream, "You'll never be this fabulous"? Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, the real culinary action is taking place around the pineapple. You stroll through clouds of cinnamon, cloves, and roasted meat. Spices, many from the same colonies where pineapples were grown, perfume the room. Georgian cooks had a penchant for sweet and savory pairings, and tonight's menu includes duck with pineapple glaze, pineapple-flavored jellies, and a syllabub spiked with rum and, yes, pineapple essence. The actual fruit rarely made it into these dishes, though. It was too valuable, too precious. Instead, recipes called for pineapple vinegar, or sugar stewed with citron and colored with saffron to fake the flavor. One cookbook from the era suggested boiling apple cores with sugar and a pinch of turmeric to deceive the tongue most delightfully. Georgian culinary catfishing at its finest. In the adjoining parlor, guests sip drinks made with pineapple liqueur. You spot one guest gently rubbing his glass against the pineapple centerpiece for luck, like it's a holy relic. Another woman discreetly sketches it in her notebook, perhaps for a future needlepoint. Or maybe she just wants to remember what real luxury looks like. As the evening wears on, conversation blooms. Someone jokes that their pineapple is late because it's waiting on its tailor. Laughter ripples around the table. You notice a young man with impossibly shiny boots leaning in to whisper, "I hear the Duchess of Marlborough touched one last month. Didn't even wear gloves." You nod solemnly. Scandalous. And here's where things take a turn. Not every dinner party was quite so formal. Some wealthy hosts threw pineapple-themed banquets, especially in the summer, when imported fruit was more plentiful, if still staggeringly expensive. These pineapple parties featured pineapple dishes, pineapple punch, pineapple-shaped meringues, Even pineapple masks handed out to guests. One eccentric nobleman reportedly hired actors to dress as pineapples and perform a short musical in his orchard. According to fringe accounts, it involved interpretive dance and a tragic love triangle between two fruits and a chef. At the more respectable end of things, pineapples were used in cold dishes, preserved in syrup, served with ice cream, a rare luxury in itself, or encased in elaborate gelatin molds. Molded foods were the height of fashion. If you could suspend fruit in transparent jelly, you were basically a food wizard. And if the jelly was pineapple-shaped? Bonus prestige. Now, lean in because this part's fun. Some middle-class families, unable to afford real pineapples, would carve imitation pineapples out of turnips for their centerpieces. They'd dye them with saffron or yellow ochre, stick on leaves from leeks or palms, and proudly display them under glass. Imagine guests pretending to be impressed, even as the centerpiece slowly gave off that distinct root vegetable funk. Georgian hospitality was nothing if not committed. One woman's diary from 1794 mentions being served pineapple punch that tasted oddly of pickled cabbage. Her host swore it came from a genuine pineapple, but the guests suspected otherwise. "I fear it was of Swede," she wrote dryly, a subtle jab and a likely reference to a rutabaga. Even in elite circles, the pineapple's presentation was a delicate matter. If it appeared too early in the evening, it looked showy. Too late, and it might seem stale. Ideally, the fruit would arrive in a moment of hush, just as the candles reached their lowest flicker and the music softened. Then, lifted like an idol onto the table, it would bask in admiration, possibly without ever being consumed. The pineapple. More symbol than sustenance. And still, the excitement around it never quite dulled. People toasted pineapples. They composed poems about them. One giddy verse described the fruit as a firework of juice encased in thorny gold. Another likened it to Apollo's breakfast, served on Eden's linen. As the evening winds down, and the pineapple is carefully carried back to the kitchen, not to be eaten, but perhaps to be stored for future showings, you glance back at the table. The guests are smiling, well-fed, and slightly tipsy. Their stomachs are full, their hearts lighter, and none of them have tasted the fruit they came to admire. You can't help but smirk. Some dinners feed the body, others feed the myth. You wake up in a carriage rattling down a country lane, heading toward something much grander than a dinner party. Something more official. You're being whisked toward one of those perfectly manicured Georgian country houses where hedges are trimmed like chess pieces and lawns stretch so wide, you wonder if the gardener owns a spyglass. But you're not here for the landscaping. You're here for the pineapple hothouse. Yes, the garden itself is impressive. Formal parterres, gravel paths, fountains shaped like dolphins vomiting water with unsettling force. But what you're really after is tucked behind the orangerie, in a secret glass-laced chamber built like a shrine, the pineapple stove. Now, a quick breath before we go in, because what you're about to see is no ordinary greenhouse. This is where science, empire, and obsession collide under panes of imported glass and laboriously fired bricks. You duck through a heavy oak door and find yourself inside a warm, humid sanctuary. The air smells like damp earth, faint sugar, and the smug glow of horticultural ambition. This is how the truly wealthy showed off in the 18th century, not just by owning pineapples, but by growing them, year-round, in England's frigid climate. A feat requiring tremendous ingenuity, heaps of coal, and absolutely no sense of fiscal restraint. Pineapple stoves, also called pinery stoves if you're trying to impress, were long, narrow brick buildings with glass roofs and hidden flues. Underground channels piped in hot air, keeping the soil and roots warm even when snow blanketed the estate. Some designs had 3 tiers of heat, one for maturing fruit, one for growing crowns, and a cooler one for propagation. It was less a garden and more a fruity life cycle simulator. One pineapple could take 2 to 3 years to mature in these stoves. That's longer than most Georgian engagements. You'd need dozens of gardeners, constant coal deliveries, precise watering, and a near-obsessive vigilance for mold or pests. And even then, a single cold snap could spell doom for your entire crop. A little frost, and boom, months of tropical pretense gone brown overnight. Historians still argue whether these stoves were an investment in culinary independence or simply vanity projects for the elite. The truth is likely both. Some landowners bragged about growing their own as a kind of horticultural trophy. Others genuinely believed that mastering the pineapple proved Britain could domesticate anything: climate, nature, even colonies. Subtle imperialism, now in fruit form. And speaking of colonies, let's not forget where these pineapples originally came from. Indigenous to South America and widely cultivated in the Caribbean, pineapples weren't just sweet treats. They were tangled up in networks of labor, conquest, and forced migration. While you admire the engineering of a British pineapple stove, it's worth remembering that the fruit's origin was anything but idyllic. The Georgian elite may have labored to mimic tropical climates, but many ignored the labor realities in actual tropical plantations. Anyway, you move through the stove's interior, brushing your fingers along wide, spiky leaves. Each pineapple sits in its own little bed, like a noble baby in a fruit nursery. A head gardener approaches, holding a long thermometer and wearing the permanent squint of a man who's seen too much mildew. He offers you a proud smile. "This one here," he whispers, pointing. "She's nearly ready. Only been 27 months. A record, that." You nod with appropriate reverence. And it wasn't just noble estates getting in on the horticultural action. By the late 1700s, ambitious landowners across England were trying their hand at pineapple stoves. A few towns even had fruit competitions, where growers would parade their finest pineapples like livestock, complete with judging panels and small cash prizes. One fringe case in Derbyshire saw a scandal erupt when a contestant was caught secretly warming his stove with smuggled whale oil for extra tropicality. In urban areas, commercial hothouses popped up, some discreet, some elaborate showrooms. You could pay to visit them and marvel at the fruit in progress. It was like botanical theater, slow-paced, sweaty, and weirdly suspenseful. One popular London pamphlet advised, "If visiting a pineapple stove, wear loose garments and avoid bold perfumes, lest you startle the roots." And of course, there were manuals, so many manuals. Georgian pineapple growing guides read like part science, part romance. They spoke of nourishing the fruit as one would a secret love, and warned against overwatering, lest the pine lose her sweetness in desperation. A little fruity, yes, but undeniably poetic. Now you pass a ledger in the gardener's office listing expenses: coal deliveries, glaziers, imported compost, even a line item for muslin curtains, for modesty. The cost of growing a single pineapple? Somewhere between 50 and 80 pounds in today's money, possibly more. All for one fruit, to be displayed for a moment and maybe never even eaten. Georgian economics at its most edible. You watch as a junior gardener very gently dusts the leaves of one plant with a feather. Not because the plant needs dusting, mind you, because this is routine pineapple maintenance. In some of the more eccentric estates, the fruit was read poetry or had music played for it. One landed gentleman insisted his pineapples matured faster when exposed to handle. Historians still argue whether this claim was delusion or pioneering plant psychology. And yet, beneath all this effort, a real sense of wonder remains. It's hard not to admire the devotion. These people didn't need pineapples, but they wanted them. Badly. Enough to build miniature climate zones in their backyards, tend them with obsessive care, and wait literal years just to whisper, "Yes, I grew that." As you exit the stove, blinking in the cooler air outside, you realize something. In a way, the pineapple stove was the Georgian version of launching a space mission. Unreasonable cost? Check. Limited practical payoff? Absolutely. But when the fruit finally arrived, golden, gleaming, and absurdly out of place, it felt like proof of something bigger. Control, beauty, prestige, maybe even a little magic. And really, wouldn't you build a glass house for something that made people gasp? You're standing now in the center of London and it's buzzing. Not with horse hooves or merchant carts this time, but with whispers. Gossip zips through the air like invisible telegrams. There's a pineapple in town, a real one. And no, it's not tucked away in someone's manor. It's on display for the general public. Yes, people are lining up just to look at it. You ease into the crowd, half curious, half horrified, because this feels like a celebrity sighting crossed with a botanical seance. Children crane their necks. A constable is stationed nearby, not to arrest criminals, but to make sure no one tries to touch the fruit. You can practically hear the fruit saying, "No autographs." This is the world of pineapple exhibitions, where one spiky golden fruit could pull in an audience, rack up ticket sales, and spawn a half-dozen dinner invitations from people hoping to catch a glimpse of the guest of honor before it started to turn. By the mid to late Georgian era, public fascination with pineapples had spilled beyond aristocratic gardens and elite dining rooms into the beating heart of popular culture. Anyone with the right connections, or just a clever marketing instinct, could host a viewing. Shopkeepers, auction houses, even taverns got in on the craze. For a modest fee, you too could stand before a pineapple clutching your hat and whisper, "It's even more beautiful in person." Some of these displays were quite formal. A fruit seller might place the pineapple in a glass cloche, ringed with decorative ivy and flanked by miniature flags of the British Empire. Others were more chaotic. Pineapple on a doily, shoved in a window, collecting sweat while passers-by debated whether it was real. You might not eat a pineapple in your lifetime, but at least you could brag, "I saw one once." Historians still argue whether these public exhibits were genuine cultural moments or just marketing stunts. But one thing's certain, they drew crowds. And where there were crowds, there was opportunity. Some particularly enterprising merchants used the pineapple as bait. Buy a cravat, get a peek at the pineapple. Purchase this hair tonic, pineapple scented naturally, and we'll let you pose beside it for a portrait. That's right. Portrait artists began offering quick charcoal sketches of you with the pineapple. Never mind that it wasn't yours. The image would live on your mantelpiece forever, a subtle, fruity boast. And of course, there were pineapple rentals. We touched on it before, but let's dive in. If you were throwing a dinner party, wedding, or important meeting and wanted to look impressive, you could hire a pineapple for the evening. It arrived wrapped, like a precious parcel. You unwrapped it before your guests, admired it, and then discreetly returned it to the fruitmonger in the morning. One pamphlet from the 1780s even included a price chart for pineapple hire. Whole fruit 1 night, 5 shillings, 2 nights, 8 shillings. For carriage use, interior display only, additional 2 shillings. Apparently, people were renting pineapples to leave inside their carriages for the smell. Imagine your Uber driver pulling up with an air freshener shaped like actual prestige. Sometimes, however, things went sideways. One fringe account describes a pineapple being stolen during a viewing at Covent Garden, only to reappear 2 days later in a different market, posing as a new import. Another report details a fake pineapple made from dyed beeswax fooling guests at a wedding until the bride's cousin tried to take a bite. He chipped a tooth and the family never spoke to him again. And you can't talk about Georgian pineapple public life without mentioning the traveling pineapple circuit. Yes, really. In some cases, a particularly pristine pineapple would be sent on tour. Displayed in multiple cities, moved by carriage, under guard. Fed specific humidity levels. One fruit reportedly made it as far north as Edinburgh before finally being retired, at which point the owner bronzed the rind and kept it on the mantle. A quiet tribute to one fruit's heroic journey. And the people? Oh, they loved it. Pineapple fever was real. Children composed poems. Adults tried their hand at pineapple-shaped paper crafts. If you couldn't afford a real one, you could at least buy a pineapple candle. Or a bar of tropical soap. Even chimney sweeps were known to advertise their services with pineapple freshness, which, given the soot, feels bold. You pass by a bookseller's window and spot a children's chapbook titled Timothy and the Pineapple. It's the story of a poor boy who wishes hard enough that a pineapple appears in his dreams, teaches him manners, and then evaporates into a puff of scented mist. Odd? Sure. But in a world where fruit has a fan club, it's not even the strangest bedtime tale. Meanwhile, deeper in society's underlayers, another industry is watching. Satire. Cartoonists and pamphlet writers start poking fun at this fruit obsession. You spot a caricature posted outside a pub, a nobleman kissing a pineapple while his wife glares from the corner. The caption reads, "He'd sooner court a fruit than fund the firewood." Biting. And still, the pineapple retains its power. And of course, nothing topped the ultimate social flex, the pineapple-themed room. If you were really someone, you might commission a parlor with pineapple motif paneling, velvet curtains trimmed with gold-fruited tassels, and a mirrored ceiling. Yes, really, to reflect your fruit-themed grandeur from every possible angle. Georgian subtlety was, shall we say, selective. One house in Bath even had a tropic room where guests could sip punch beneath hand-painted murals of pineapples and parrots. The ceiling was dotted with little golden suns, because nothing says tropical authenticity like colonial fantasy and stucco. Guests were encouraged to dress in Caribbean-inspired garb, a polite euphemism for feathers, silks, and the occasional awkward moment. But the pineapple wasn't just for the rich and overdressed. As printing techniques advanced, even middle-class homes could get in on the action. Wallpaper rolls featured repeating pineapple patterns, often paired with palm leaves and ornamental scrolls. Cheap ceramics bore pineapple decals. Faux fruit centerpieces let you pretend, just for a night, that your roast beef shared space with something tropical. You slip into a little knick-knack shop and find pineapple-themed playing cards. The Queen of Hearts wears a fruit hat. The Joker balances one on his nose. Someone clearly got carried away, and it's delightful. There's a pineapple music box in the corner that plays a very slow rendition of God Save the King, and you begin to suspect the fruit's reach was both limitless and slightly absurd. By now, the fruit has done something rare. It has leapt from reality into iconography. It's not about the taste anymore. It's about the idea of wanting, a craving made visible, sculptable, purchasable. And here's the kicker. Most of these decorative pineapples were designed by people who had never tasted one. Imagine that, adoring something based entirely on image, rumor, and secondhand experience. It's like decorating your entire house with pictures of Beyoncé without ever hearing her sing. Bold. And still, the fruit kept evolving. As the obsession grew, artists began to take creative liberties. Some pineapples looked more like alien hedgehogs than actual fruit. Others were stylized so heavily they became abstract symbols. Blurs of gold and green representing something juicy, maybe? Historians argue whether this stylization was deliberate or just bad sculpting. Either way, the result was hypnotic. And finally, you exit through a ballroom decorated for a grand fete. The chandelier above your head is, what else? Shaped like a cascading pineapple, made entirely of crystal and light. It sparkles as the candles flicker, casting tiny fruit-shaped shadows across the parquet floor. Here, in this shimmering room of wealth and wax, you feel it again. That absurd, dazzling hunger. Not just for pineapple, but for what it represents. Ambition. Reach. The illusion of tropical closeness in a world that is, for most people, quite cold. You walk out under the stone gatepost and glance up one last time at the carved fruit perched above. Not edible, not warm, but somehow, still sweet. You leave the ballroom and step into a carriage. A pineapple-shaped fan still clutched in one hand like a keepsake from a particularly juicy fever dream. The scent of candle wax and cinnamon still clings to your coat, and the late-night streets of Georgian London roll past in a blur. But just when you think you've seen every angle of pineapple obsession, the carriage rattles to a halt outside something grand, something towering. You look up. A house. No, a temple. Atop its domed roof rises not a weather vane, not a flag, but a massive stone pineapple. Elegant, impossible, and just a little smug. Welcome to the pinnacle of fruit-fueled architecture. Yes, while pineapples had already infested the home, the drawing room, the table setting, and the wardrobe, now they were going after the skyline itself. This wasn't just decoration anymore. This was symbolic architecture, and you were about to be swept into its spiny embrace. We touched on Dunmore earlier, but let's linger. The Dunmore Pineapple in Scotland, sometimes called the world's most bizarre building, is a true Georgian marvel. Commissioned around 1761 by John Murray, the Earl of Dunmore, this structure was part garden folly, part political statement, and part inside joke. Nestled among the fields like a tropical hallucination, its 45-foot pineapple dome crowns an otherwise ordinary walled garden building. Historians still argue whether the pineapple was added as a cheeky nod to colonial ambition, a loving tribute to horticultural success, or simply because the Earl returned from serving as governor of Virginia and thought, you know what would look great on top of this? Fruit. The pineapple's stone leaves are intricately curved, each one carved to channel rainwater away from the structure, proving that even in whimsy, the Georgians couldn't resist engineering elegance. You stand beneath it, half expecting it to drop seeds of wisdom, or possibly oranges. Wrong fruit, you remind yourself, but still. But the Dunmore pineapple wasn't alone in its audacity. All across Britain, pineapples were popping up in increasingly absurd places. Church steeples, mausoleum domes, gateposts taller than a coach and six. You wander through a London square where a townhouse has pineapple pediments on every window, 16 in total, like a fruit bowl frozen mid-juggle. There's a reason for all this spire-top showboating. Georgian England had entered the age of visual messaging. You couldn't post your vacation fruit on Instagram, but you could mount a pineapple sculpture above your front door and let every passerby know. I have arrived. I am fashionable. Also, I probably drink imported rum. Pineapple architecture straddled the space between wealth display and imperial aspiration. The fruit had come to symbolize British reach, its ability to transplant tropical delight into cold, misty soil. Whether the building was a garden folly or a grand estate, that pineapple on the roof wasn't just decorative. It was code. You round a bend and nearly trip over a pineapple-shaped sundial. That's right. Time itself, now told by fruit. Some genius thought, what if the shadow of a metal leaf could mark the hour? And lo, it could. You don't know whether to applaud or weep, so you do both, very quietly. One quirky tidbit. In Bath, a now-lost tea room boasted an immersive pineapple experience, where the building was shaped like the fruit, inside and out. Guests were served pineapple-flavored cakes while seated beneath golden pine cone chandeliers. It only lasted 5 years before collapsing, perhaps under the weight of its own ambition. But for a time, it was the talk of the town. Meanwhile, new country homes began incorporating pineapple domes as a kind of badge of honor. Some owners hired Italian sculptors to ensure anatomical accuracy, down to the swirls, ridges, and leaves. Others went the opposite way, designing pineapples so abstract they looked more like mutated artichokes. Either way, the architectural fruit craze fed an insatiable hunger to be seen as worldly and innovative. But even the scholars couldn't resist. In Cambridge, a botanical institute used pineapple finials on their iron gates. Supposedly, it was an inside joke among horticulturalists, one that nobody else ever really understood, but which made the gatekeepers smile every morning. You reach a small chapel built during the pineapple craze. The altar carvings feature vines and fruits, grapes, olives, and yes, right there in the corner, a pineapple. Historians still debate whether this blending of Christian iconography with a tropical fruit was a subtle nod to empire or just an enthusiastic woodcarver gone rogue. And it wasn't only in England. The pineapple architecture craze spread across the British colonies, where climate made growing the fruit more plausible but also less novel. In parts of the Caribbean, India, and even West Africa, buildings with pineapple motifs popped up as markers of British influence. A strange reversal, like colonizing the aesthetic of the very places the fruit originally came from. One plantation house in Barbados featured twin pineapple towers, one for storage, one for show. Visitors entered beneath a fruit-topped archway, almost as if passing through the rind of empire itself. You imagine standing there, feeling the heat, hearing the buzz of insects and wondering, did anyone ever stop to ask the pineapples how they felt? You stroll now through a modern-day street, and you still see the echoes. A Victorian house with pineapple railings, a school crest with a pineapple in its center, a pub named the Pickled Crown. The legacy is real. The fruit's grip, centuries later, remains sticky. And why? Because architecture isn't just function. It's fantasy in brick and mortar. The Georgian pineapple obsession fused the practical with the aspirational, creating spaces that whispered, you too can taste the tropics, if only in plaster. You glance one more time at the Dunmore pineapple, silhouetted against the softening sky. Its leaves look almost windblown, its curves somehow wistful. It was ridiculous, sure, but also beautiful. A monument not just to status or sweetness, but to a moment in time when Britain believed that fruit could conquer the world, or at least the rooftop.